Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura McKenzie. I'm a director of product design at Hubspot, and so excited and honored to be here with these amazing panelists. The topic of this panel is Diverse Teams Win, investing in product teams to win a diverse customer base. So mostly just wanted to kind of start off by welcoming everyone, especially our panelists. Some of you I know and I've talked to before. Some of you I just met like 5 minutes ago, but really excited to be chatting with all of you. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura McKenzie. I'm a director of product design at Hubspot, and so excited and honored to be here with these amazing panelists. The topic of this panel is Diverse Teams Win, investing in product teams to win a diverse customer base. All right, I'm going to turn off Social 27 and hope that this just works for that. And so maybe all of you should do that too. And Nancy will send any questions to me over Slack, and that's how we'll handle that. So thank you, Nancy. That was actually a perfect timing. Is that I want to thank all of our panelists, but I also wanted to thank and give a shout out to Nancy Riley, who is our Vice President and General Manager of the Ecosystem Product Group at HubSpot. She pulled all of this together, and she is moderating kind of from the background, managing the chat, and will send questions our way. So thank you, Nancy, already saving the day. And before we dive in, I really want to make sure we're spending most of our time listening to our panelists, hearing all of your stories and getting your advice. But as a way of kicking it off, I wanted to share kind of a recent experience, a recent story of my own, hopefully as a way to kind of set the stage and let everyone know kind of how important of a topic this is to me and how the impact is real. So the story is that I recently partnered with a colleague. Her name's Gabby Thomas. She is the program manager of diversity, inclusion, and belonging at HubSpot. And we did a recent research project together. And the goal of the research project was to better understand the HubSpot experience for customers and partners that identify as Black. I won't get into all of the findings because there's a lot of them, but the major and kind of truly humbling moment for me was Gabby and I set off to do this together. And pretty early on, we realized that, Gabby identifies as Black, and she was able to break through and just learn so much more from these customers and partners than I ever could. And I've been doing this type of work for years, which I think is why it was so humbling for me. But it was so obvious how everyone who we talked to opened up to her in a very different way. And it seems obvious, but it was this breakthrough moment for me of why representation matters so much, and that it's part of the whole product development lifecycle, from the research to what you produce and to what you launch, to who's servicing and who's selling the product. This all matters. And it really also was this like aha moment for me of that building diverse teams, it's not just the right thing to do for moral reasons. Like I was in that for a long time. I believe in that for that reason, but it's what's right for the customer. It's actually how you have impact. It is how diverse teams win. So just wanted to share that as a way to kind of kick us off. And now I want to dive in with all of you. This is the main point of this panel, is to hear from you. So I'll go through and kind of ask you each to introduce yourselves. The thing that I'm looking for is just, your name and your pronouns, if you're comfortable. I didn't share that. Mine are she and her. Your role and your company, and then a quick story or example about how the diverse makeup of your team has made an impact. So I'm just going to go through kind of who I see first. That's Darling. We can start with you.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. My name is Darling Jimenez. My pronouns are she and hers. And a little bit about me. I own a marketing company called Leading Results. I actually started out as a developer for the company, and then through time moved up through the ranks and ended up purchasing the company. So now I run the company. And I think one of the most interesting things that I've learned through this kind of journey that I've been on as an agency owner is how much easier it is to access customers when you do have diversity in your team. I'm Afro-Latina, so I do speak Spanish, but I consider myself Black. And I do have a chance to connect with a lot of Latinos, Spanish-speaking, people as a result of the cultural aspect and just having an understanding in language. And I think that has opened so many different doors for us that before we didn't have access to, because there's a lot of companies that prefer to work with other Latinos that understand the Latin American market and who they're servicing. So I think that's a brief example that I can provide.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Thank you, Jaya. Thanks for sharing, darling. That's a great example. Jaya, let's go with you.
Yeah, my name is Jaya Kandaswamy. I'm a senior manager in product management at Capital One. An example that I can share is very early on in my product career, I realized that I cannot be solving for all the use cases. I definitely wanted to leverage the team, my stakeholders, because I strongly believe, Lauren, to your point, like the customer base is so diverse. So if we just think in one angle, then we're not going to solve for their problems. And definitely a product is not going to be a good fit in the market. We were designing an UI screen, and when I brought in like my entire team, where there were 40 to 50% female and males, like Capital One is very adamant about like having a good diverse mix in the teams as well. So when we think through all of these use cases, some of the use cases that many folks thought about, I didn't even, realize that will be a problem. So that is the, power of inclusion. So when we bring in all these perspectives, then we can solve for some of those things. I can definitely share more as we discuss about this, but it is such a powerful thing. And I am so lucky and glad that I realized that early on. And ever since, it has been like an inclusive product journey for me.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, and I love that. It's like no one can do anything on their own. This is how we can reach more of our customers by having inclusive teams. All right. How about you, Lo?
My name is Lo Lee. I'm a design manager at HubSpot. My pronouns are she, her, and I would say, just thinking what to say, and I kind of think of like the Power Rangers or something. Like I feel like it's hard to articulate, but the more difference you have and the more inclusivity you have, like everyone's kind of providing these own perspectives and have these skills and talents, and like we attack every effort with so much cohesiveness and quality. And it's like a feeling. I mean, you see it in the stats as well, but it's really cool to see.
The Power Rangers. Love it. It's like another new part of my life again. It's come back with children. And last but not least, Maya, how about you?
Hi, I'm Maya Singletary. I also use she, her pronouns. I'm the lead web developer at G2 and one of the task force leads for G2 Together, which is our employee-led inclusivity and diversity group. And I mean, I think what I see is that just, representation really matters. When you have a diverse team, you are able to recruit easier and more people will see themselves succeeding at your company. So being able to really stand by those values of inclusivity and diversity can make a huge difference in people not filtering themselves out of being able to work with your company or help your company.
Absolutely. Yeah, you need to see yourself. You see yourself there, you see yourself in leadership. Super important. Thank you all of you for just jumping right in and getting to it. Where I'd like to start is just talking through kind of if your teams or your companies or organizations have any formal goals around diversity in product or within the company, and if you can share a little bit about that. And honestly, just whoever wants to jump in, I want this to be pretty collaborative. So just if anyone wants to go ahead, and if not, I'll start calling on you all. All right. Does anyone have goals? Yeah, Jaya.
Yeah, I was speaking on mute. Yeah, I can start. With Capital One, there are like a ton of formal programs, both internally and externally. There is a lot of commitment that Capital One has been making ever since like all this upsetting things that we have been noticing. And also like with the employee resource groups, there is like a lot of support for employees to make sure they have all the network and the launch pads they need to make sure that they have their professional development on track. And mainly during the times that were so upsetting and was hard to digest, Capital One across the board, like with a ton of leadership, came out and they were available and also created forums and platforms for us to share like how we felt and like just speak our minds. So definitely that makes me feel much more better and even proud to work for a company like that is so much more invested in diversity and inclusion.
What do you think, you mentioned a few there, what do you think make those efforts kind of so effective?
I think it definitely is a top-down approach. The CEO and the board, like even the board commitment, they wanted to make sure it is like a 50-50 split, like with women versus men. So that is what they're striving to achieve. And from the board on down, like our CEO was, I think, voted as one of the best CEO for diversity. So I feel like it definitely is something the senior leadership and the board and the executive leaders need to walk the talk and also display that, which will then eventually trickle down to the teams.
That's great. I love that a company as large as Capital One has takes it so seriously and has such top-down support. What about you, darling? So you're kind of you're in charge. How do you think about it?
So I think honestly for us it's a little bit different because we are a smaller company, but one of the areas of focus for us is finding talent that is diverse. In the Charlotte area, it's not always so easy because we are a little bit north of Charlotte. So there's a lot of people that won't want to travel as far. But we're really focusing in the next 2 years in finding new talent that is more diverse. Culturally, but also in terms of experience. I think when we talk about diversity, oftentimes it's easy to just talk about the race aspect, but we really want to have a variety of experiences because I think sometimes the pieces and nuggets that you get from people that have had like different life experiences, maybe lived abroad, maybe had a very different childhood than the rest of your team. I think these are actually things that end up contributing significantly. And ultimately, I think we're trying to create a team that is really passionate about what we do, but is also very anchored in a desire for social justice, right? They want to make the world a better place. And that's one of the kind of guiding principles in choosing candidates for us is finding people who are diverse, but also are very passionate about making the world a better place, even through something like marketing, right? So I think that's one of the concrete goals that we have is just finding people that are diverse culturally as well as in experience.
How do you screen for some of that? So when you're looking for that kind of like, when you're doing the interview process or the screening process, how do you find people who kind of align with those values?
Yeah, so honestly, I think it's interesting because oftentimes you conduct interviews in a very formal setting, and I feel like people have this pressure to present themselves a certain way because they're trying to get the job and they want to make sure you like them, and so you kind of get a very watered down version of who the person actually is. So one of the methods that we've introduced is interviewing in more informal settings whenever possible. So instead of saying, hey, like this is going to be a formal interview, hey, let's have coffee, hey, let's meet up somewhere, hey, let's talk about topics that are not necessarily related to this. And then you start to kind of get a better sense when people talk about the things that they're passionate about, the things that they watch on TV, the things that they like to read. You start to get a better sense of the person who they actually are as opposed to who they're presenting as for the interview. So I think that's one of the ways, just more unorthodox ways of interviewing and really trying to build communication and see what their passions are in general versus in the job aspect.
That's cool. It must be a way to also just, kind of set that stage of like we talk a lot at HubSpot about bringing your authentic self and your whole self to work. That kind of sets the stage early on. What else? Is there any, Maya or Lo, is there anything that your companies are doing or that you'd like to see them do, or you'd like to see change if maybe they're not doing it already?
Yeah, one of the changes that we've had at G2 ever since unrest that kind of started in June, the leadership team got together at our recommendation and actually put this into their metrics for success for the year. So at the top of the list, one of our number one metrics and methods for success is to invest in diverse teams and live kind of like our peak values. And for us, what that looks like so far is a commitment from employee success, making sure that anyone who is an interviewer gets full training for interviewing so they can kind of get through that bias if there is, and just be aware. We also do an INPS survey, so it's an inclusivity NPS score that we're tracking throughout the company. So that's something that started before June. We've been doing it for a little while, but more emphasis on that number and tracking over time to make sure that we are getting better at making people at the company feel included.
That's cool. I saw Lo kind of smiling at the INPS. I had never heard of that before. For anyone else who maybe doesn't already know what a lot of companies do, ENPS, NPS, Net Promoter Score. It's a way of seeing whether someone would recommend a company or not. And so then companies do that for, would you recommend working at this company? And the E is for employee, and I guess the I is for inclusivity. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. And Lo, anything to add here? Do you want me to move it on to our next question?
Oh, I just think it might be helpful to know HubSpot. I'm probably missing on some of the data we have, but I think so we have a company-wide. I know some of you had talked about like all of the things that the company is running out, like retaining underrepresented groups of talent, and also bringing in underrepresented groups is part of our like company-wide goals. So that goes down to every single product, every group really. And then we also have this really awesome diversity report. You can Google it if you're curious about it right now. So it's like, we show you what's going on. You have to realize you have a problem with data until before you attack it or know how to attack it. And then also similar to Maya, we have a ENPS. So that's like the qualitative data that we get to figure out what's going on.
I love hearing about all the different ways that people are kind of coming at this. It's interesting that a lot of this has started, kind of more recently. One of the things that our CEO Brian Halligan has said is like, history kind of crawls along, and then something major happens, and that's when change happens. And so, all of this should have been going on a long time ago, but it's great that it's happening now. At least it's happening. So happy to hear that all of these organizations have this. So it seems like we're all kind of bought in. We all know diverse teams create better results. But I'm also curious of like, sometimes that can create some discomfort or some people being uncomfortable with all of that. What are the challenges that any of you have experienced? And Lo, you're kind of still up on my screen and nodding. So I don't know if you want to start with this one.
Sorry, the full question was just challenges in general.
Yeah, exactly. The challenges that you encounter.
So many. I mean, we're talking, I've been trying to, how do you teach anti-racism? It's like, where do you start teaching someone physics if they've never realized, if they don't know about physics and you're like, yeah, there's force and like, it's there. And they're like, I don't see it. You're like, no, it's, so that to me has been a really interesting challenge. And I think the way that I've been trying to approach that is we've been doing a lot of programming, and I appreciate that about HubSpot. Like they're down to just be like, go for it. You're gonna have monthly chats about anti-racism or just diversity, go for it, do that and lead and mess up, but just try, but try to build in these behaviors. So you at least just like, what is force? What does it feel like? Maybe start to sort of get the idea of what this really complicated world of diversity is.
Awesome, thank you. What about you, Jaya?
Yeah, so there are two things that come to mind, like, the challenges wise. One is Capital One is like a very tech heavy company. Like we really like to, try the latest and greatest in technology, and machine learning and artificial intelligence is one of them. And I'm sure like everyone is nodding. So definitely the bias in like, what your algorithm spit out is like a big concern for us. So we've been joking internally, like, oh, we're so excited about machine learning, but with the governance to make sure the model is doing the right thing, like that definitely is a big emphasis, and definitely a ton of scrutiny goes into like implementing any models. So those are like some challenges, even though their advancement is to the right thing, but we don't want to do the wrong, with the introduce something with a bias. The second thing is, when you include a lot of folks, and like in design thinking sessions, like we just come up with all these ideas, and like when we rank order and prioritize them, then you don't want to come across as like, oh, these are all great ideas, but we're not going to do them. So I have had some instances where like somebody can take that personally, like, oh, is my idea not that great, etc. So the best way is to at least explain the prioritization exercise and just the metrics that we are using to prioritize and drive towards has definitely helped. But there are like, intrinsically challenges when it is so sensitive. There are many things that can come up, but being transparent and having that open and honest dialogue has definitely carried me through all of those situations.
The power of transparency, it's so important. I just said to someone today about like all of us being human, and as humans we tell ourselves, or in the absence of transparency we tell ourselves our own stories, and so just bringing that transparency helps with that, of that. Then you're not saying, oh, my idea was a bad one. It's like, oh, now I understand more of the transparency. I think that's
and it also carries them along, right? Like, if you explain the process and like you value them, like, hey, I understand, like, we're not going forward with this, and this is why, that is more important to them than like whether this idea is in the market or not.
Totally. And now you've taught them as well, and more people who can do this type of work. Darling or Maya, what about you? Any challenges in building diverse teams?
Yeah, so I actually was going to chime in a little bit because in our team, we've actually run in the past into certain conflicts based on that diversity, right? And one particular occasion, we had someone who was very conservative, and we had somebody who was not very conservative. They were kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, and very frequently in small conversations that would happen in the lunchroom, something would be said that would upset the extremely conservative person. And so we would run into a lot of kind of just friction from people who have different values, and I think for us, what really kind of helped us to make it through that period of time is establishing a culture of sensitivity and respect. So making sure that in your diverse team, you emphasize the fact that this is an open and welcoming environment, so you don't want anybody to feel bad. At the same time, you do have to respect that people live differently. So as long as you're not outwardly being offensive, then it's not really up to us as business owners or us as a leadership team to kind of guide what somebody's doing with their personal life, as long as they're not affecting you directly. And so I think it's really challenging, especially sometimes when we're dealing with generational gaps. Sometimes we're dealing with just cultural gaps. And so having an environment of open communication is one of those things that can help to ease that. There's still going to be friction, but I think as long as there's the marker of respect and you have the ability to reassure your employees that their dignity will always be upheld and that they'll be respected, I think that helps to move things along. But the challenges will come. I think that's part of the diverse team dynamic, is people think differently and there will be friction. So having a process in place to be able to handle those.
Yeah, I think that's similar to kind of low, like, when you're talking about, like, people are on like different parts of their journey, and how do you even teach this and know where people are at? And there's going to be friction, and some people are more comfortable with different levels of friction as well. And I love hearing that you're leading with dignity and respect, and that's the way, rather than like a silver bullet for it, but instead it's let's go back to kind of those common values. Maya, what about you in G2? What are some of the challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, so many. A lot have been said already, especially around, not really having like a roadmap for this all the way, right? Not really having a ton of guidance and, how we move the needle for some of these tough problems, but realizing that the problems are tough and that people are going to make mistakes, but, having that respect that everybody's trying. Another thing that kind of stood out is just people, like everybody being in different places on their journey. We have a lot of very socially active people at the company, and they want to do like, everything. They want as much visibility around everything that we're doing as possible. And other people are more on the conservative side of not conservative politically necessarily, but just on the conservative side of how much of that they want to share at work. So, really allowing a space for everybody to kind of come with whatever level it is that they're willing to participate in. But having a clear message from leadership that this is a company value. And if this isn't something that, is really going to jive from you on a company value space, maybe G2 isn't the place for you yet right now, right? Because this is the direction that we're moving in unapologetically.
I think that's one of the big shifts right now that we're seeing is, companies now saying this is a company value, and maybe it's not the right place if you don't have that. It seems like that's something that, at least in my career, companies seem to have kind of shied away from that. And so now it feels like, a really good change of like, okay, well, no, we're saying that, maybe certain things are not acceptable and you're not going to be able to do that. And it's okay to be where you're at on your journey, as long as you're willing to move forward wherever you are, but it's not okay to just kind of stay where you are and think that you're okay there. Also a big plus one to we're all making mistakes as we go, and that's okay too, as long as you own it and learn from it, and get better. But yeah, there's challenges, definitely. I like that all of you are open enough to share the challenges that you're seeing. What about, so, I talked a little bit about the project that I did that was about connecting with customers and prospects and users. And obviously that's a huge part of product development, is doing that. Curious if any of you have advice on how to do that and how to make sure that you're talking to a representative sample of your customer base. So either if you have any advice or if any of you have experienced challenges with that at all.
I can just talk about screwing up. So we're still working on how to, ensure we have this huge international base and we have all different kinds of customers and partners. But one time I did screw up, was I was running a test on a prototype that we had, and it had, stock photos in or something. And all the people in the stock photos were white. And the person on the call, I'm guessing, was not white. And she basically called me out in the call. And I was just like, I should have like done my due diligence to like get to know who you are and like really understand who you are, because it's gonna help you see yourself in our products. If we account for that, it's gonna help me get better context for our conversation, because you're coming from a certain culture and history. So that just made me be more, I was like, I should have done more work. I should have, factored this in, because she was annoyed and I would be annoyed too.
I think when I hear that story though, my take is like any reason of why we do research beforehand is you caught it, right? Like an unfortunate situation for you, and the person who you shared that with, but like you caught, yes, ways that you could do better next time, but you caught it before letting it be out there with everyone and can change it. And that's, again, I think that's what we all try to do in product all the time, is try to get that feedback early.
Yeah, it's one of the things, that, if you want to build a product that hits a diverse customer base and like definitely serves the customer in the right way. There are a few things that, basic to start with is to start with the customer, right? Like, having all those focus groups, which we have all done, and also having diversity in that focus group so you can hear from all different angles. And anytime diversity or inclusion is being mentioned, is always, I don't know if there is, the one thing I don't want to assume is just about race and gender. There is like a ton of other things, like, with respect to roles and like, all of the things together, which all of those points of views definitely add a ton of value in how you define your product. So it is not only just about your technical team, but stakeholders from ops, they would have had like a ton of experience. Whenever we define something, an UI, they'll be like, oh, what about like bigger font size? Like, what about accessibility options? What about like, other things? And we're like, oh my gosh, that's a checklist we need to, start building. So all of those stakeholders definitely add value and bring that diverse opinion and point of view into consideration. And the last thing I would say is, also it is about testing, like, testing and failing fast. So is there a way to just create a mock and put it out in front of all the customers and your stakeholders? And even like we have a inner sourcing community in some ways, like where employees are, it's called dog fooding at Google. It's like more testing your own dog food. So just trying to just create that like awareness. Hey, is this good? Like, is this good to hit the market? So those kind of like checks and balances will at least try to help you hit most of the corner cases that you may not think through.
Yeah, I think following in line with that too, I just wanted to share a small personal anecdote. I remember one of my first jobs out of college was actually as a freelance web developer. And what I started doing was I started trying to talk to businesses that were part of the local community, which looked very much like me. And so it was interesting to see how much quicker they were willing to work with me versus other larger companies that were, and I was just a freelancer at the time, that were trying to gain their business. And I think that the difference for them is that they saw that it was someone that looked like them, someone who understood their local community, someone who could, in a way, relate to them at their level. So like speak in a certain way and know where they come from in their community. And I think that's part of where diversity becomes such a big factor for being able to grow your team, for being able to grow your company, is that sometimes that knowledge or that ability to communicate in a certain lingo or just understand the local community and the needs of that local community automatically makes you beat the competition no matter how much more experience they have, because you're able to relate in a completely different level. And I think that oftentimes diversity is kind of thought of as this kind of higher like purpose or higher level thing, but at a practical level, it's really something that can make a huge difference for the success of your business, and can lead you to possibly be able to beat out people that typically you wouldn't be able to, just because of that edge that connection with that demographic, that local community can provide.
Yeah, it really is. It's, I mean, that's kind of like that, the topic or of this, again, like in the title, it's like diverse teams win. Like there, it's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's like they do. It really is. It's a competitive advantage. You're learning different things, kind of like, Jaya, you mentioned, it's seeing those like edge cases sometimes that maybe other people aren't going to get, and then it's making, like you said, darling, it's making those connections, the personal connection perhaps that you wouldn't have made. Maya, anything to add here?
Yeah, specifically within the tech world, I think that we have a lot of messages telling us like, okay, well, if it's built with technology, if it was built by, machines, or something like that, that it's not going to be biased, right? That's going to be like this neutral thing. And really, that's not the case, right? We see all the time that these unconscious biases are kind of like plugged in, like without people even realizing it, into our systems. And that affects everything, right? Like, and it limits companies who aren't aware of it in terms of the different customers they can connect to, and different opportunities that they might miss. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to kind of keep that in mind, that you are getting an edge by really embracing diversity. And it may not be obvious and it may not be like known at the time, but just it'll be a part of your fabric. It'll be a part of your being if you are considering this and putting that into your day to day.
It is. It's almost, when I heard you saying that, at first I was thinking like it's almost scarier, with tech, and Jaya, you talked about this a little bit too, of like with the machine learning, it's all of these things that, like, because you can't see it and because there is somewhat of this blind trust, it's almost scarier because it seems like, oh gosh, like we could actually do more damage. But I think the flip side, and I'm like very much an optimist, is like we have so much, like we have great responsibility here, but so much opportunity to really make a difference with that too, if we do this right and kind of use it to our advantage. We Nancy just sent a question in that from the audience, and so to make sure we're encouraging audience participation, I definitely want to jump right to this one. In each of your opinions, what is the most important factor to attract top diverse talent? What do you all think that this kind of, as you're looking to recruit the top diverse talent, what's most important to them? Yeah, you want to go, Maya?
I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but one of the things I look for is representation, right? It is important to be able to see yourself as a leader in a company. And one of the signals for that is, do they already have leaders at the company that are women, that are from underrepresented groups, or any type of diversity from different types of backgrounds that aren't just like the white male perspective that everybody is kind of expecting.
How do you look for that? Do you
yeah.
pull up their website and you look at like the leadership team, or is it in the interview panel, or do you ask?
I think that people do look at the leadership teams. I know I do, right? And I know that a lot of companies are aware that they're not quite there yet, right? So in the absence of that, you kind of have to really be able to drill, like whoever you're, like if you're an employee, if you're looking to work at a company, you have to be able to ask those questions. Like, all right, I see your company doesn't have a lot of representation in this area. What sort of things are you doing to improve that? And will I be supported if I want to grow at this company?
That's great advice.
Yeah, and another way also is to like LinkedIn. If you just see people in Capital One and you can just see like a long list, it may be a fairly arduous exercise, but at least if you are like, so much concerned, like that's also another way to approach that. But I agree with my walking the talk absolutely is critical. Like, hey, yes, you can say all what you want on your website, but are you really like meaning that? And then I also think there is like an attribute to this is the culture. Like, yes, you can, on paper have diverse teams, but the culture is the glue that binds it all together to make sure that they feel included and they feel like they belong there. So those are like two key things that will attract top and diverse talent.
Back to that INPS survey of seeing, do people really feel it? Lo, what about you? What do you think is the most important factor?
I just had to be kind of scrappy. I mean, it's like how. So I found, I don't know if POCIT is the way I'm supposed to say it, POCIT, people of color in tech. Finding networks of people who are diverse. Oftentimes folks who, I don't know, I'm in a lot of groups that are associated with like how I'm different. And so people know each other. So I think you have to do due diligence to, I think one, like you have to give a damn about people. Like people are gonna smell if you're, trying to meet a quota. And they'll also tell if you're actually there to really help people and like mentor people, and people will talk to their friends and they'll talk to their colleagues. So I think it's like, it just takes a lot of work, but you have to like truly be in it to Maya's point, like you have to care about people and be like, what are you looking for? What do you need? How do you want to grow? And then just do the due diligence to get into networks of people that you may not be connected to. And
Darling, what about you? What do you think the top factor is to attract?
So I think it's really interesting because for a long time I was that diversity factor, right? I was the only person of color that was working for the company. And so people felt a lot more comfortable kind of coming up to me to ask about opportunities, because they saw that I was a little bit different than everybody else. I think now as my role has changed, I'm kind of putting forth the effort to show through our website, through the content that we create, that our images are not all black and white. I'm trying to show a gamut, not only in the pictures and imagery that we use, but even in our lingo. Like I feel like I have a very interesting story, and I grew up in an interesting setting. So I want that to come across so that people understand that you don't have to come from a conventionally successful, if you will, background. You don't have to be already born with all the opportunities. Like, you have a chance to succeed. And I feel like my personal story is a way to connect with that, hey, it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter your background. Like, you have a chance to do something great. And so I find now that by putting myself at the forefront, it helps people to connect with my story, and then helps them to understand that as the company, our values are different because I come from an immigrant family, because I grew up in a non-traditional household, I'm sorry. And so I think that really just putting forth the effort in the materials that you create, in the way that you communicate, in the way that you introduce your company. I think sometimes we're so businessy and we forget that there's a personal element, and a personal story that's driving why do you do your job, why do you work for who you work for. And so leaning into that personal story often helps to connect people to their own purpose and how you can succeed in a place where maybe they didn't think they could, and by hearing your story, now they feel like they can.
I love that. Any advice to like HR? So, human resources, recruiting, they're all, I think, having this kind of top of mind. Any advice that you would have to them of how to do a better job? Because the other piece is like competing for this talent, like how companies can stand out. I'm hearing the give a damn, walk the walk. I think that's what it really needs to be. But I'm curious if any of you have experience with kind of helping HR and recruiting also demonstrate that, so that it all becomes clear to potential candidates.
One thing they can do also is HR can help bring those elements to the forefront, right? The culture, it is impossible to understand unless you experience it. So as a candidate, is there a way for them to feel the flavor of the people within the organization? Like, what will it mean to work with organizations? So during the interview process, I have seen more and more companies pair up buddies where they can help with answering any questions about the company or anything with the interview process. It's not just about the recruitment. It is also about hey, you are also interviewing the company. Like, what does it mean behind the cover? So that is that probably will also give them some more information to gauge whether that place is the right place for them to work.
I like that. Yeah, they're definitely interviewing the company as well. And I think you kind of mentioned it too when you started with it's representation, and I think that goes across the board. That goes to HR too. It's like making sure you have the representation and the voices everywhere, so that then it's coming up, and you don't need to. It just becomes ingrained, right, in the way that all departments are working. I had two more questions left, but then we'll see if anyone in the audience has more questions. But I'd love to also hear, more about any features or parts of or new products or anything or processes that have come about specifically to serve either a specific race or gender or any type of different experience. It doesn't need to be race or gender either, but that represents your customer base. Does anyone have an example of a feature or process?
Yeah, so I have an example, and this is It's going to be interesting to share because I'm a little bit nervous about it, but also really excited. So we are recently doing a new kind of product offer that is geared towards Black-owned businesses in historically disadvantaged areas. So we have a couple of like places in Brooklyn that we're trying to tackle because that's my hometown. And the kind of way that we're going about it is going to be somewhat hip hop theme, again, because it's salons, it's barbers, it's Brooklyn, where Notorious B.I.G. is from. And so that's actually a product that we're in the process of working through. Just the materials is very hip hop focused. There's a lot of like social media that is going to be themed around hip hop. And so I think that's going to be interesting. Hasn't launched yet, so I can't vouch for the results yet. But I'm really excited because I think it's going to be a very different way to try and connect with the audience. And we decided to take it the route of something that I knew really well because it's kind of what I grew up around, and it's something that I know is important in that area. And so I'll report back on how it goes. But it's just something new that we're trying that is speaking specifically to the audience that we're trying to target.
That's cool. I'm curious why you were nervous about, like, were you nervous about sharing it here and now, or are you nervous about the outcome of it?
I think I'm more nervous about what's going to come of it, whether it's going to work. Like that's what I'm nervous about. And since it's new as well, so, but I wasn't nervous about sharing with you guys. I feel pretty comfortable.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear how it goes. Any other kind of things that you've done differently because of the diversity that you all have on your teams? It's okay if there's not. I think this is where we're at, right? Is we're in the building of the teams, and hopefully making everything better because of what we're doing. I know one example that we've kind of experienced a bit at HubSpot is when we have accessibility and thinking of making our product better for people who we generally talk about it in terms of having sight impairment, but it could be other accessibility issues there. And I think just the more people who you have on your team who can show that this is an issue and show where our product might be lacking, the more focus we've had in that space. And I guess I'm a little embarrassed to say that it hasn't come up as much before, like that we need people saying that, but I think that's just like one of these areas that like it's a blind spot until it's not. And then once we have someone on the team who can say like, this, we're lacking here, it's been really eye-opening. We do have one other question. So the question is, are your companies investing in bias reducing software for long-term diversity, equity, and inclusion talent acquisition? Maya, you talked about this a little. You mentioned training. I don't know. So I'm curious about what that training looks like for interviewees.
Yeah. It's specific training for for hiring managers or anybody who would be involved in an interview process. Because in our company, that could be like a number of people. Like individual contributors can sometimes, be in on an interview and lend their expertise and help answer questions for prospective employee. So really just making sure that every single person who is going to touch the interview process has just some of that base level training, just to make sure that we have at least given people the tools to do this more successly and try to mitigate some of that bias. As far as software, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say that whether or not which one we use, but we do use something.
Okay, fair. What else? I guess I'm curious about how all of your companies or all of you are kind of thinking about it. Are you focusing more on kind of that short term of bringing in kind of diverse talent, meaning people who have all different types of experiences, or are you also looking at do you feel like your company's also really looking at their team itself, like the teams that we already have in place, and helping them? Is it a balance between the two, or you feel like it? it sways for one or the other?
We definitely focus very heavily on the inclusion inclusion aspect of diversity. A lot of times you'll see companies, they'll say diversity and inclusion. At G2, it's more like inclusion and diversity because we realize that the inclusion part has to come first. That's how we're going to retain the diverse talent that we already have and make sure that they're getting the most out of their experience at G2. So I would say that from a long-term perspective, inclusion is very, very important, just like an ongoing thing. But it's also like the immediate things that we can do right now, which fit more into the short term, that are also a little bit centered around inclusion, more so than diversity. Diversity
What
is a goal, but we realize that it's going to take longer.
what are some of those little things that are not little things? I'm sure they're actually pretty big things. But what
Yeah.
are some of those things that you're doing?
Yeah, a lot of the things. All right. So one of the things that we started doing are town hall discussions with different people throughout the company, not people who are necessarily from underrepresented groups. They are absolutely invited to share, but having like allies come up and talk about what they have been learning or different things that they have been noticing and realizing, and they really have taken the time to put themselves in a vulnerable position, right? And these are some of like the leaders at our company. They're saying we didn't know that this was a problem in America. And I just realized that, like, over the course of the summer, over the course of the pandemic, how bad it really is. So them opening up and sharing some of those virtual, oh, sorry, um, totally left my brain what I was going to say there. But just some of that vulnerable, that's the word. Some of those vulnerable moments.
Yep. It's really powerful when someone can show that vulnerability.
Mhm.
What about, so you said that you can't share the name of the software, which is totally fine, and we're not necessarily looking for that. But I'm curious, for any of you, if you are using software to do things like detecting bias in job descriptions, or a way to kind of make resumes more anonymous, using analytics to detect any issues in either your interview process or your performance management. You don't need to share any proprietary information or confidential information that of what you're using, but are teams using any of that or doing any of that?
Lauren, you probably know more about this than I would because you did all the research on that, so I'll let you answer that for me.
So HubSpot does do some of this. We do. There's a service that we use that looks over all of our job descriptions, and it does it like, it looks for words like like, it sounds like embarrassing to say now, but like, we're looking for a rock star candidate, or people who like work hard, play hard. Like, those are all things that there's a certain type that you might be attracting with that kind of language, and so this software kind of goes through and highlights that and make sure that you're looking at that. We're not attracting only one type. I'll be honest. One of the things that we've used for resumes, it's stripped out names so that people can't make any judgment based on a name or a school. But there's a lot of room for improvement here. I won't share who we're using, but there's room for improvement because sometimes it strips everything out, and now it's like, is the resume even valuable anymore? But I think one of the things that I always think about with this is like, you need to take some small steps, and it's not going to be perfect for a while. And so it's not calling out any of those companies. It's like they're trying, and this is, we make product. We know that what you first launch is not, V1 is not ever going to be the best, and we need to just get it out there and learn. We have about 8 minutes or 7 minutes left now. I want to just hear, like, my final question for you all was, is there any advice that you have for kind of product leadership teams, or any leadership team, of how to do this better, or what steps to be taking if they're not yet? Just any last advice that you would have?
Yeah, I can start us off with that question. So one of the things that I always think about is whenever you see large companies put out advertising or a commercial or something, and it becomes hugely controversial because it's culturally insensitive or racially insensitive, I always wonder, like, who looked at this and thought that this was going to be okay? And so I think that one of the things to also think about as you are considering how to diversify your teams and the importance of diverse teams is that they're not only there to help you succeed better, they're also there to help you avoid making mistakes that can potentially tarnish your brand forever. Because when you don't have that diversity, you might not be seeing something that a person who has a different background would see, and would immediately know, hey, this is not going to fly. People are not going to be okay with this. And so having that inclusion can potentially save your brand. And I think sometimes that it's not something that we think about. Like, your brand can be saved by that diversity. It's not only a moral responsibility, it's something that's going to help your business grow, and it's also something that can potentially save your brand. So just something to think about.
Awesome advice. Jaya, any last?
Yeah. So a few things that product leadership can do is, like we all touched upon, like, the importance and the merits of having like a diverse and inclusive team. In order to enable that, like if you have like a few teams under, your organization or LOB, the head of product or lead product can help product managers rotate and have that kind of open culture, like, hey, you're not kind of like boxed in, like if you're team A, you're not going to be team A like forever. So there's like opportunity to rotate where there's like all this diverse opinions comes out, to help. And then the other thing is also these product leaders to share some of their challenges, what they have faced, and also hearing from other leaders of color and different representation. That definitely will also help build those teams and have that common goal.
Love that. Thanks for those examples. All ones that I think teams can just go and act on too. Super, super actionable. Lo, what about you? Any last words of advice?
I forgot what the question was because I was like thinking about what Darling and Jaya said.
What you would leave product leaders, what you would want product leaders or any leaders at companies who may be listening in kind of to hear or take from this.
Yes. So I would actually kind of like plus one to Darling and add to that being ensure that you're getting feedback on things that you're putting out and the policies that you're putting in place, but also like reward those people, pay them, promote them for doing that work, and maybe even like distribute it so it's more evenly weighed. There's a really great, I'm obsessed with this talk called Being the Glue, and I always think about glue work, and it matters, especially in these cases. And then, maybe I lost my thought. Jaya said something that inspired me to think about something. I'll leave it there.
All right. Thanks, Lo. I love the glue work, kind of thought and movement as well. And Maya, do you want to close us out? No pressure.
No pressure. Sure. Well, what I would say is just make sure that you don't underestimate your diverse talent, right? And I feel like this happens a lot in tech, especially. I know that I've experienced this personally. You feel like you have to work twice as hard just to like get in the door. But then when you get there, it's almost like no one expects you to, succeed to a certain level, right? Like they may think, oh, they're less likely to think that Black women are interested in leadership, even though we're probably one of the most ambitious groups out there. I have seen many people, they'll look over at some of the overrepresented groups and say, hey, would you like to do this leadership opportunity? Would you like to participate in this? And this is something that your diverse talent is probably hungry to do. So maybe not wait for them to explicitly say it to you. Offer those opportunities up and see what they're interested in. Assume that they are more ambitious than you probably think that they are. And that's really going to help them. That's really going to help them succeed. That's going to help your company succeed.
I think you nailed it. I think that's it. Don't underestimate people and kind of give them that opportunity. So love it. We have 2 minutes left. I mean, if there are any like major questions, Nancy, send them our way. But I also would like to just give everyone the opportunity to like use the restroom if people are hanging out. But also really, really just thank you all. You shared so many great stories today. So much really actionable tactical advice. And we're so lucky that we have all of you leading in product. So I think the future is bright for all of us. Thank you all for spending time here today. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Lauren. Bye, everyone.